For attendance, Cameron, what would you like for us to do for attendance here?
I think there's a next slide. We have
Thank
the
you.
policy board. There we go.
There we go. So Barb Campbell is here. Megan Perkins, are you here?
Present.
Rita Schenkelberg is absent today. Phil Chang.
Present.
Thank you. And Bob Townsend.
Present.
Thank you. I can see that we also have Hovey Anderson and Tyler Dickey. And we have Andrea Napoli and Andrea Bro is with us today from COIC. We have Greg Bryant, who just does so much good work for this committee, and we appreciate him so much. Nice to see you again, Greg.
Thank you.
And we've got Rick Williams from ODOT is also here with us today. Teresa Conley. Somebody's going to have to remind me, Teresa, I am so sorry. I just don't even remember your organization.
I just added it. I'm with ODOT.
I'm sorry, Teresa. When I see your face, I know you're ODOT. Thank you. And it looks like we've got David Abbas from the city of Bend as well today. So with that, I think I will happily accept a motion to approve the minutes. Is that right? Or do we want to?
Yeah, we're going to go through just a quick reminder to raise your hand if you have a comment, and the meeting's being recorded and streamed on YouTube. So people may join in that fashion as well.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, now we can go to the next ones.
Now, if we're going to do public comment before the minutes, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at the agenda and the screen at the same time. So, public comment. Have we got any of the members of the public who would like to speak to the Bend MPO today? If so, please use the virtual raise your hand feature.
I don't see anyone.
I don't see anyone either. And I don't see that we have any additional people on. So with that, I will finally get to agenda item 4 and happily accept a motion to approve the April 20th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. So Councillor Perkins with the motion and Commissioner Chang with the second. All those in favor, go ahead and raise your hands if you will. And that looks unanimous. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program amendments, which will be presented to us by Hovey Anderson.
Hello. So we have 2 amendments to our MTIP, which is the acronym for Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. Mouthful. We sent out a notice, received 1 public comment for the 3rd Street to 15th, which is the Greenwood section basically of an ODOT project. The question for public comment was just to make sure that the extent changes were not excluding anything in the Orchard District, and they were not. That was confirmed through a comment from Bob Townsend. Thank you, Bob. So this first amendment, which is key number 21489, is adding funding from the city of Bend for this project. The project total will now be $3.2 million with a $1.5 million contribution from the city of Bend. So does anybody have any questions about that project? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go to the next one, which is, I'll just put the key number in the record, 20011. It's a US 20 from Tumalo to Cooley Road. And we're just changing, the ODOT is changing the mile points to better show the extent of the project. So those mile points are now on US 20 from mile point 14 to mile point 17. And you can see those in the project website as well. Just for your reference, mile point 14 is right at Tumalo in the downtown Tumalo area on US 20, and the mile point by 17 is just north of Cooley. So that's just kind of gives you some context. So any questions on that project? No comments were received. All right, we'll go to the next slide then and see if there are any additional comments or questions, and maybe ask for a motion.
I move approval of the proposed amendments to the 2021 to 2024 MTIP as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Councillor Perkins and a second from Commissioner Chang. Everyone in favor, please raise your hands. And that looks unanimous. Great. Agenda item number 6, the MPO Surface Transportation Block Grant Fund Exchange Agreement. This will be presented by Tyler and Hovey.
All right, so I'll start, and Hovey, I'll have you just jump in if I miss anything, okay? We just have a couple of slides here. There's a lot of text, and I apologize for that. So our budget, our annual budget includes some STVG funding, and those are the flexible funds that come through the MPO each year. And we've had a change. In the past, we were able to utilize some of those funds for if we needed external support, if we needed consultant support for some of our planning projects, that type of thing. There's been new direction, and we are no longer able to administer most federal funds out of the MPO because the city of Bend is not certified to contract federally funded projects. And so we are now required to utilize ODOT's procurement contracting process for larger external contracts. ODOT is still allowing us to contract for some of our smaller administrative services, like Cameron Prowse support services to us and our limited legal services that we have. And so that's caused a bit of an issue for us in the sense of having to work through ODOT for any external contract could be pretty time consuming. And it just adds another level of complexity for us to manage some of our particularly our smaller external consultant support projects. And so ODOT is allowing us to exchange some of those funds, some of those federal funds for state funds. And Barb, you would remember this from City Council when the street preservation funding that the MPO gives to the city each year, the city does the same thing. They exchange those federal dollars for state funds. And that allows on the city side, that makes just utilizing those dollars a lot easier. And for us, with state funds, we'd be able to utilize the city's procurement process for external support services. There is one glitch with it, or one hitch, I guess, and that's that when we go through that exchange process, ODOT keeps a share of those dollars. And so for each $1 of federal funding that we exchange, we get 94 cents back in state funds. And that's going to be changing. It's actually going to go to 90 cents starting in 2022, I believe. But still, we know that we feel like that's a reasonable trade-off, and that's to help ODOT as well in terms of covering some of their services, in terms of their process to get through that process. These fund exchange agreements are either in place or pending with the City of Bend and Bend Parks and Recreation District as well, so that they can better utilize some of these federal funds that come through the MPO. And so what we're recommending we have a draft agreement. ODOT has provided a draft agreement to us to exchange those funds. Our recommendation is that the policy board approve that agreement, and then that we limit the use of that exchange agreement for smaller contracts. And we're thinking internally in terms of staff, that we utilize this fund exchange agreement for small contracts, say up to $25,000 or something comparable to that. And then if we're going to if we have external support services that are larger than that, we would then consult with ODOT to determine the best path forward. Do you have any questions? Does that all make sense, what I just said?
I was just wondering, do we have any other options to, use the full value of the funds instead of kind of like inserting all these transaction costs in here? I'm also just curious if you have a sense of if it goes from $1 to 90, $1 for 96 cents to $1 for 90 cents, like how much of a loss is that over, in the course of a year?
Well, I think, for us with the money, the federal funds that we do get, I think our intention is to keep almost all of them federal, so we can maximize, the amount of money that we're receiving. We would utilize this process, like I said, just for small projects. This agreement or that process, that 94 cent, this fund exchange process has been in place for a long, long time. It's laid out. There's an agreement between ODOT, AOC, and LOC for this fund exchange process. And I think all counties utilize it, and most smaller cities utilize it as well for some of the federal funding that flows from ODOT out to cities and counties. And for us, I know at least in the past, we received some, back during the 2009-2010 recession, we received some extra federal funding through the MPO. And through that process, we didn't have the option to exchange them, and we had to keep them federal. And in that process, then ODOT had to manage those dollars, and the city of Bend, and we ended up giving them to the city of Bend for street preservation work. And we estimated that the extra overhead cost of keeping them federal was about 10 to 12%. So at that time, the 94 cents was, it's still a better deal. And I think ODOT, this 94 cents amount, let me just get back here, sorry. That 94 cent number, that's been in place for 15 years, 20 years, a very, very long time. I think ODOT's updating it to 90 cents now just to reflect increased cost and process on their end to deal with all of these funding, because they have fund exchange agreements, like I said, with every county and most cities in the state. Does that answer your question or questions, Commissioner?
Yeah. Okay. Converting colors of money.
It's converting colors. And I said, because of that loss of revenue, we want to try and keep as much of it federal as possible so we can maximize the use of it. But when we do want to go out with at least smaller support agreements, like if we have right now, we may be having a small agreement to help us with some technical work during this current fiscal year. And that project, I'm hoping will be in the $20,000 range. To step through an ODOT procurement process to secure it for a $20,000 contract for us doesn't make sense, because it could take months, for us to get a contract in place, and then the extra reporting process it would be needed. That adds a whole nother level of bureaucracy, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. And it's just that, like it's a handful of small contracts.
Yeah, and I think what we would do is, if we were going to utilize, if something comes up in the future, if we need support for a bigger planning project, if we wanted to go bigger, we would definitely consult with the policy board on whether it makes sense to go through an exchange process or whether it makes sense to utilize some other contracting process.
Okay. Thanks. I can make the motion if nobody else has any questions. I move to authorize fund exchange agreement number 34746 with ODOT.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Chang and a second from Councillor Perkins. Is there any further discussion? I would just say that I have been aware that we have exchanged the color of money for years, but I didn't catch until today that the agency that keeps all of the money is ODOT, not the federal government. Do you see what I mean? That actually makes me feel a little bit better that the 6% is not staying with the federal government. The 6% is staying with ODOT. It's a little closer to us. So just, I do believe this is the right thing to do. So I'll be voting yes. So with that, unless there are any other comments, we'll look for a hand raise. All in favor? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. And we have agenda item number 7. This is a public participation plan update overview. And Andrea Napoli is going to walk us through this one.
Thank you. So if you remember, I think it was Tyler or myself at a past policy board meeting had mentioned that we were working on updating our MPO's public participation plan. This is a federally required plan for all MPOs. The purpose of which is, we want to establish a documented process for providing the public with reasonable opportunities to be involved in MPO planning, decision-making processes if they would like to. The plan was last updated in 2009 and amended in 2013, so definitely time for an update. And just a reminder that this is an information-only presentation, so no decisions to be made on the plan update as of yet. We want to go over, review the draft plan with you, give an opportunity for questions, suggestions, comments. So as I go through these slides, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Next slide, Ty. So there are really 4 focus points of the public participation plan update this time around. We wanted to make sure that, to confirm if there were any changes to federal or state legislation in regards to public participation applicable to MPOs. We also recently updated our Title VI plan. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, meaning non-discrimination and equity. So we wanted to build off some of the work done with that. Also, there's no such thing as plagiarism in government. So we want to see what other MPOs are doing, what their public participation plans look like, and also document newer successful processes and tools that we either use in the past, currently using, or would potentially like to use in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and go through sort of section by section of the plan. There's 4 different sections, starting with the introduction. We explain the role of the MPO, the purpose of the plan, and any requirements, federal or state requirements for MPOs regarding public participation. And then we have a section on how Title VI and environmental justice applies to our public participation plan. And essentially, we need to work to proactively include underrepresented populations, and with that, work to try and enhance our involvement processes to try to reach all segments of the population to make sure that, everyone has an opportunity to have a voice in transportation planning and decisions that are being made that want to. Next slide. Additionally, in the introduction section, we have a paragraph on desired outcomes of public outreach. We want to provide access to the public to information on decisions being made, We want to give clear, concise, and timely information. I think a good example of that is we tend to use acronyms a lot. And then we want to provide welcoming opportunities that people can provide meaningful input. Building relationships with some of our local organizations that represent, populations that maybe we don't hear from all the time. And then ensure that decisions that are being made consider the needs and concerns of all users of the transportation system. Next slide, Tyler. So additionally, in the introduction is how this plan was developed. And as I mentioned before, we looked at other MPO's plans, any recent legislations, best practices, and our existing plan, what we wanted to keep, what we didn't. But a big part of this was concerted outreach. So I reached out to a little over 30 different local organization contacts and met with about half of them. And these organizations represented low and very low income populations, those with intellectual or physical disabilities, persons experiencing homelessness, our older and younger populations, and our Latino population. So in these meetings, I would introduce what the MPO is, what we do, and then I would ask them, specifically, what is your organization working on? Who are the people that you work with every day or represent? And then try to find a transportation nexus with that. So, what is important to them or those that they represent related to transportation? And also ask, how can we provide better or more opportunities to make sure that other voices are being heard regarding transportation planning and decisions? And what we all kind of came up with was, for now anyway, the easiest thing would be I would put them on an email list, and I would essentially give them a heads up email based on what I heard from them, what is important to them or those that they represent. Hey, this item is coming to the policy board. I think you would be interested in this. And also, they were very willing if we had anything project specific to help us with any kind of targeted outreach that we might want to do. Like for our, every 5 years, we look to update our 20-year long-range plan if we wanted to do specific outreach to the populations that they work with. So all in all, certainly a good exercise and starting to establish some relationships and try to figure out how we can better provide opportunities to get more input and participation. So the next sections 2 and 3, section 2 outlines the MPO structure and process. So our MPO responsibilities related to the plans and the programs that we produce, and then the makeup of our board and committees. And then the third section is the largest section, and that goes over our public outreach and engagement methods, starting with approaches and strategies. So 3 overarching approaches and strategies. One is, trying to build more relationships with local organizations, partnering. So an example of partnering that we would really like to continue is when we were updating our 5-year transportation plan and the city was updating their transportation system plan, we did a joint public outreach process for that if it was just the MPO by itself, we would have never been able to do what was done. So we would really like to continue that partnership and look for opportunities for partnering potentially with other organizations. And then expanding access and opportunities. So for example, whenever the day comes that we have in-person meetings again, we would also like to hybrid that with still offering an online option for people that could participate in online meetings. And then initially, another topic of that is going to where the people are. So, it's very standard in planning to have an open house for projects. But those are important, but that's, saying that we expect people to always come to us, and that shouldn't be the case. We should also include, going to where the people are to get their input, and not always expecting them to come to us. Next slide, Tyler. So finally, I know this is a horrible slide. In our section 3, we have a list and description of all the different tools and means that we either currently do, have done in the past, or would like to do in the future to implement those approaches and strategies that I talked about. So of course, we have our public meetings, we have our website, a lot of functionality with that. We use the city's website, their news feed, to put, for example, we just put out the public comment period is open on the city's website. We do a number of, a lot of these different listed items. And then on the left, that's an example. That visual is a fact sheet that we put together pre-COVID when we would go out to different community events. And this is one site's English, one site's Spanish. Next slide, Tyler. So finally, the last section in the plan outlines specific procedures for our plans and programs. What we are going to do or hope to do in regards to public outreach when we update or modify our specific plans and programs. So the visual on the blue visual on the left, that shows you kind of what we do when. So every year we update our work program. Every 3 to 4 years, we update our transportation improvement program. We should be looking to update our public participation plan and our Title VI plan. And then every 5 years is our long range metropolitan transportation plan that we want to update. And of course we do more than these items, but this is, an example of our required MPO tasks. So for each task, there's a table, and that table to the right is an example. So that table shows the procedures that we will do when updating this plan related to public outreach. So you see the action, so MTP, Metropolitan Transportation Plan development. We don't necessarily have a formal public comment period when we're developing the plan, but under processes and tools, you'll see all the different ways that we, do public outreach and try to engage the public on providing input onto development of that plan. And then, as you go further down the action items, the actual adoption, and if we want to make changes to that plan, amendments. So then we have a formal 21-day public comment period and the different processes and tools that we use for that. So last slide here, our current and next steps. So we have provided the draft plan to our federal and state partners. So Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and ODOT, asking if they could get some eyes on it and provide us any comments on development of the draft plan. We just yesterday opened up the required 45-day public comment period on the draft plan, and the visual there is our screenshot of the public notice on the city's newsfeed. The TAC will be reviewing the draft plan at their next meeting on June 2nd, and then this will be coming back to you for your consideration for adoption at your July meeting. And with that, are there any questions or suggestions from the board that I can answer?
I would just like to say that I'm sorry I can't be on camera right now this very second, but I really appreciate the effort it took to reach out to underrepresented communities. Thank you for that, and I think that will make the process stronger and the plan stronger. So I really appreciate seeing that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I would just make the comment, I completely agree with Megan. I remember from the last time we updated this plan that it involves a very long list of organizations that get notices from the Bend MPO. So if anybody has any ideas for any groups, organizations, just anybody that might be interested in our work, we can absolutely, they can be added onto the plan, and at the very least be getting those public notices. So yeah, I just think this is so important. Transportate I was going to say something really corny like transportation connects us all, but it is true. So great. Thank you, Andrea.
Yep.
That gets us to agenda item number 8, which is Surface Transportation Block Grant, STBG funding schedule. And this will be presented by Andrea as well.
Thanks. So if you, again, going back to the last couple board meetings, we had talked about these additional surface transportation block grant funds that the MPO recently found out are available to us, or we call STBG dollars, and that this is a result of the estimated amounts for years 2021 through 2024 and the actual amounts that we're getting. So this results in an additional approximately $127,000 per year for those years, totaling a little over $500,000. And at the March and April policy board meetings, the board had approved use of some of these additional funds for projects that had gone through the competitive project application process last year that either received partial funding or no funding. And so to list those, about $64,000 to the Broster House Railroad Pedestrian Undercrossing Project to fully fund that, and then to fully fund the Northeast 8th Street Sidewalk Crosswalk Safe Routes to School project, and then additionally a little over $30,000 to relaunch bike share in Bend. And additionally, at that April meeting, we had initially, or the board had initially started talking about applying splits to these additional funds. The last policy board had approved a portion of these STBG dollars to stay with the MPO and a portion to go to City of Bend Streets Department. And at the April meeting, the board had asked that we table this item to a later date. So this is, we wanted to follow up on that. So as a result, we want to put together a schedule, an anticipated schedule to revisit that item. The next slide, Tyler. So here's our anticipated STBG funding schedule. So next spring, at the policy board meetings, we will bring back how these additional funds could be allocated, because also at that time, we will need to look at our next round of STBG funding. So for years 2025 through 2027, and the board will need to determine how those funds will be allocated. So we will roll this into the same process. And then in summer, we will bring the competitive application process that was approved last year. We will bring that back to the board and the TAC to see if there's any changes to the project funding criteria or the process in general that the board would like to see. And so this would be for any amount that the board allocates to this process for those additional 2021 through 2024 funds, as well as our next round of funding 2025 through 2027. And then in September, we expect to open the actual competitive project application submittal. Are there, and this slide has a lot of text in it. Are there any questions or comment? Is the board agreeable with this schedule to roll in these additional funds, how the additional funds will be allocated? This isn't necessarily an approval, but we just wanted to make sure that the board concurs with what we're proposing based on last month's decision to table the item.
So we're going to wait a year for additional 2021 funds to be allocated?
Yeah, if we want to roll this into the process with our next round of funding, then it would be, we could include it with when that starts in next spring.
I think, Barb, I was going to mention, if you look here, you know, a good share of those 2021 dollars have been allocated. It's, I mean, in terms of, because those three projects on the bottom here, the Broster House project, 8th Street, and the bike share, that's consuming, you know, 70–80% of the 2021 dollars. There's a little bit.
It's already over 100,000 of the.
Yes, there's not too much of the 2021 that's not allocated, but then there will be the 2022, 2023, and 2024 dollars that we would just roll into that next process.
I will make the comment that it was the Bend MPO policy board that decided to have this split and have the process be at specific times. I don't know what I'm trying to say. So previously the concern was, and I think someone mentioned this in another meeting, that we had been spending an awful lot of time discussing very small amounts of funding. And so the previous MPO policy board, number one, decided to just decide on that 60-40 split, with 60% going to the city, so that we just didn't have to rehash that over and over again. And then to make it so the 40% was being, as we're seeing here, discussed every few years. So it's a bigger bundle of money that we are discussing. Tyler, did that sound correct as far as how we got here?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were using the term multi-year allocation.
There we go. So thank you, Andrea. So instead of every single year trying to decide how are we going to allocate 40% of $127,000, we said we would do these multi-year allocations. The only reason I bring that up is to this current policy board, to make sure this board understands that that was just a decision made by the previous board. And if this board does not like any of that, we could change any or all of this process or any or all of the allocation. We could decide that we don't like the 60% or we don't like how this process is going. So I just want to make sure and I'm looking for a little head nod there from Tyler.
Yes.
Right. So I just want to make sure that this board understands that if they really do not like how this is looking, we could discuss, changing any aspect of this funding schedule. So for me, I will say, I think we're on a good track now that I understand that it is a very small amount of leftover money from 2021 that will be moving on to that 2022 to 2024 allocation. That was a lot of words. I don't know if there was a lot of meaning behind any of those words, but
Well, and I think those of us who've been engaged in this process for a long time know that it's been not only a lot of words, but a lot of process. And so I think we're just trying to minimize, the amount of time that we are spending as staff and for you as a board to kind of sort through this. So it's on a cycle that we do a lot of work in 1 year and then it's done for a few years. I think that's our overall intention.
exactly. And I still do believe that that is a fine and good intention. Any other questions or comments about this? Yeah, Phil.
Barb, I'll just say I appreciate you kind of explaining that, this 60-40 was a point in time, decision, and like I can certainly understand, how you got to it. We heard about the Bend Streets Department and kind of I forget the metric again, but like how we're not, we're still trying to get to the metric where we're maintaining streets at a level where it's not just going to cost us a ton more money later to deal with them. And we've certainly seen how the competitive application process yield some really valuable and important projects. And so there's tons of good things to spend this money on. It's a limited amount of money, and any kind of proportional breakdown is going to could be justified. But the fact that we don't have to decide for the 2020 for the next tranche of money for a little while, I appreciate that. And I do want to, I think it is valuable to look at the proportional breakdown again, and we may just decide to do the same thing, but it's worth at least reevaluating.
Yeah, and specifically what you're talking about, Commissioner Chang, we will be revisiting that next spring.
Yeah. So great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about that item? I haven't seen none. Thank you for whoever's operating the slides. So I do think that moves us on to agenda item number 9, which is a public transportation update with a different Andrea. This is Andrea Bro, who's with CET, and Teresa Connolly with ODOT.
And so Barb, I'll just introduce just for just a moment here, with 3 new board members, we at staff have talked, and I've talked to you about it as well, Barb, there's been a tremendous amount of transportation planning work has taken place over the last few years between the county, CET, the city, and ODOT within our study area, and as well as our own work. And so we're wanting to, as time allows, each month or every other month, bring you an update on just some of these major planning projects that have happened, what the outcomes of those have been, and what's coming, as in terms of outcomes of these different plans. And so today we wanted to have an update on public transportation and what's happening on that side of the transportation world right now. And so we have both Teresa and Andrea Bro here with us. And I think, Teresa, you're going to go first. Is that correct? All right, let me stop sharing my screen.
And I'll share my screen. And I apologize, my computer decided to do a mandatory update right at noon. I'm hoping it's my, there it goes. I think it finished. Perfect timing. If you can allow me to share my screen. And while Tyler's doing that, I'll just introduce myself again. Teresa Conley with ODOT here out of Bend. I work as the Regional Transit Coordinator for Region 4, which covers the swath of Central Oregon from border to border. So it's a great region to work in. And I act as a grant manager for transit funding that flows through ODOT, as well as I provide technical support, compliance over kind of oversight for a wide range of agencies and tribal programs throughout the region. And I think.
Are you able to share?
Oh, I'm going to stop sharing your screen. Yes, I can do that now. Thank you. Okay, where is. All right. I don't. Are you seeing the PowerPoint yet?
Yes. Yep.
You are. Okay. And
We are. It's not in presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
Perfect. I always wonder what you see on the other end.
You never know.
All right. So I am here to give an overview of kind of the ODOT Public Transportation Division briefly, and then hone in more on the grants that we provide to CET. That's the most tangible nexus, I think, you have with my work with ODOT. So quickly, this is a broad brushstroke of kind of what PTD, or the Public Transportation Division, is about. And today I'll mostly focus on this first column here, which is the most boring picture, but the grant management, I'm talking about the funding. We also actually operate intercity services through contracts. So if you're familiar with Eastern Point, which previously ODOT operated, now Pacific Crest Bus Lines has taken it on independently. But we do operate via contract intercity services throughout the state, and we started the Columbia Gorge Express service a few years ago. Also passenger rail as part of our portfolio. We also support the broader multimodal network. So through some recent reorganization at ODOT, part of the active transportation staff has moved under the PTD umbrella. I'm sure many of you know Chris Chang. He's a direct report to region, so he has not moved into our unit, but many of his colleagues have. And so our portfolio includes active transportation and the Community Paths program, Safe Routes to School program, and transportation options. So those of you who work with Kim Curley or Brian Potwin, the person who manages their funding program sits in our unit. And we also do a variety of planning work in partnership with other divisions within ODOT, focused on public transportation, bike ped, and transportation options. And little things like GTFS or Google Transit, we support the statewide network of Google Transit for our providers and provide some planning tools as well, just because they're a great resource and becoming more and more necessary for effective transit operations. So honing in on that first column, now we're going to get into well, you're used to all the federal acronyms about funding. Well, here's some more. These are a variety of transit funding sources that CET and other agencies around the state receive. So first, there's the FTA bucket, or Federal Transit Administration. Usually if you see a 53, that means it's FTA funding of some sort. And most of these programs have a specific intent behind them. And there's a future slide where I'll highlight that for you just for future reference. Also, you were just talking about STBG funding. ODOT also transfers some funding over into the color of FTA funding to support primarily vehicle purchases, because there are really significant ongoing costs that the FTA funding just doesn't quite meet the need for statewide. Also, there are two key state funding sources: the more recently instituted statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, or STIF, that was passed through House Bill 2017, which was just great for public transportation around the state and creating a more stable and reliable funding source. And that's based on a payroll tax of 1/10%, with revenues returning proportionally back to where they are earned, if that's the right word, with every county receiving a base amount of funding. And these last 3 bullet points are more of local concern, but I have them here because they're key pieces of the funding puzzle for public transportation programs. For agencies that have districts, that is a key revenue source and a flexible revenue source. Local contributions, so general fund match that's the city provides or other cities around the CET service area provide. That's really key to keeping them whole. And then also program income like group passes with the university, fairs, advertising, things like that. Let me see if I missed anything in my notes. I'll touch on this later, but there's reporting related to each of these grants. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind in terms of as these funding programs are adding up and the number of partners adds up, it creates more complexity around specifically CET's operations. So how is CET funded? Well, in a nutshell, some funds are received directly and some are through a variety of subcontracts. So first, the MPO did establish, I imagine it was COIC, as the direct recipient of the FTA funds that flow to urbanized areas, and that's specifically the 5307. CET or COIC, I use the terms interchangeably, sorry, Andrea, can apply for funds directly. Not all funds, but can receive ODOT grants directly, and other funding like CARES, because they receive those 5307 funds directly through the MPO, they are able to access other funds directly from FTA. For some of these, well, actually both of the key state programs, the STIF and the STF, by rule, the funds go to transit districts, and where there is not a district, the funds go to the counties, and tribes also receive an allocation. So in the CET service area, it covers Jefferson, Crook, and Deschutes County, as well as the Warm Springs Reservation. So that's 4 entities that CET partners with just for that STIF piece of funding. And it's the same for STF. Fortunately, those programs will be merged for the next biennium. So that's great, a little bit less burden on CET in terms of the paperwork. Cities and counties also establish subcontracts for some of the funding sources, some of the 5310, which is targeted towards seniors and people with disabilities. Although there's a lot of additional paperwork, so for the STIF program, I mentioned there's 4 agencies, so it quadruples the the quarterly reports and invoicing for CET, but they do get a better match rate. So that's like the upside of receiving funds through a subcontract, and it's just for some of the contracts. Any questions so far?
Teresa, I would just add, a lot of this is reimbursement based. And so it's not as though CET receives a pot of funds. It is we establish some type of service or purchase a bus, submit it through some type of grant portal, then seek reimbursement after that reporting.
Yeah, thank you. That's key. Yeah. And I have this little puzzle piece icon on here for a reason, because I think particularly in the CET service area, it is like a puzzle matching all of the fund sources together every biennium. So right now I was counting, and I think CET or COIC has at least 10 partner agencies that they receive funds from or have a subcontract with, including the 3 counties, Warm Springs, the cities of Bend, Madras, Prineville, Sisters, and then I don't know if the MPO would be considered separate. And then there's partnerships with the Forest Service, Parks and Rec. So it's great to see these local partnerships and local support, and it also just adds to those puzzle pieces. This is a slide I'm not going to talk through, but I wanted it to be a resource for you in the future if you're trying to remember which 53 I was talking about at one point in time. But quickly, this just highlights some of the different program intents associated with the different fund sources and how the funding flows, who is the first recipient or who can be the first recipient. I will highlight a couple examples. So I didn't really talk too much about the intercity funding. That's like right in the middle of the table there, the 5311F and SCIF intercommunity. This is how the mobility hubs, well, the land purchase is going to be completed. And it's a statewide competitive process. So not necessarily guaranteed, but a great resource when an agency can access it. Some are more formula-based, and our CET can rely on them a little bit more year to year for just ongoing operations. And the STIF, the new funding, is going to become more and more important for that, maintaining operations. The intent behind the STIF was first to enhance service for the first biennium. And then after that, let's keep that going and let's make incremental enhancements as we go along. So that's an important shift that can help CETs maintain operations with a sustainable funding source, but not necessarily growing, I guess growing with the rate of employment.
Right.
And so moving away from the nuts and bolts of the funding, I want to talk a little bit about the planning that goes into how the funds are being used or how the puzzle pieces are matched together. So for capital projects, that's something that is being talked about a lot here with CET, especially as it's growing and the service model is shifting. The formula funds that are really support the core ongoing operations are best for smaller investments that could almost be seen as ongoing operations, like replacing vehicles, improving bus stops. But really for the significant investments like mobility hubs, that's when agencies look to the larger statewide discretionary programs, just because it costs so much. An agency like CET just it's really difficult to budget it with their formula funds. Another key thing to have on your radar related to capital projects, there's always strings attached, right? And so there's always a useful life associated with the asset. It's shorter depending on like the size of the vehicle. A sedan for a dial-a-ride service could be 4 years. But for a larger urban vehicle that you would see in the TriMet area, it's 12 years. And then there's a mileage that would go along with that. For shelter and paving projects, it's 20 years. And so that was one of the pieces with the Hawthorne Station. It has a 20-year useful life, which is unique for a large structure, but it's only midway through that. And so CET is on the hook and has this, what I flagged in the last bullet point here, a restrictive covenant where it needs to be used for public transportation services for that useful life. There is an option to sell the site and then demonstrate to the FDA you're continuing to use the proceeds for transit. So there are some hoops agencies can jump through, but these are things in the back of CET's mind as they're planning for capital projects. I want to quickly highlight the mobility hubs work because I think it's spectacular how you all are collectively lining up funding to make this happen. So first, the CET master plan and your local transportation system plan highlighted the need for mobility hubs, dispersing the impact on Hawthorne Station and allowing the routes to move from hub and spoke to a more efficient model around the community. And from there, now the Bend MPO has a grant to do a deep dive on, okay, we're doing mobility hubs. We want to, what will they look like? What are the key site components? Where are the general geographic areas where they could be? So the feasibility piece. And now we just heard last week that the Oregon Transportation Commission did approve an almost $2 million grant for CET to do due diligence on a couple sites and then purchase one site. And so these are just stacking up. If everything goes well, you're going to have mobility hubs built. And then there's the Go Bond and other funds to then construct the project. So, I mean, this is like an ideal situation if, if everything goes according to plan, but it shows the partnership and the range of fund sources and strategic thought that goes into each of these steps. So I wanted to highlight that example. And that kind of leads into my last slide too, about the transit planning behind the scenes. Of, you'll have the transit master plan and it's not always designed to drill down into the specifics of exactly where a route will stop, exactly where a mobility hub will be sited, it might recommend you need to do additional digging in a separate process. And so that's what you're seeing here. I tried to illustrate in this graphic how the transit master plan does fit in with the other plans, including your MTP and the city's TSP. Hopefully they're speaking to each other. It's hard to get them perfectly aligned timing wise, but I feel like you did pretty good with that here locally this last round. Oh, one last thing that I did want to highlight, and I have it in red at the bottom. This is the ongoing conversation that transit agencies have, especially as they grow. It's the debate between coverage and productivity models. You'll see a coverage model very often in a rural area like Gillum County. It's all demand responsive service. Their coverage model is to serve as many people as possible with lifeline service. And so they will pick anybody up in the county, go down gravel roads. They need those 4-wheel drive vehicles, and it just changes how they plan. And it's a minimal level of service for as many people as possible. As agencies grow, and especially in urban areas, they'll start to have the conversation of, okay, should we shift the limited amount of funding to key corridors, key urbanized areas, and look for productivity, increase ridership, and really serve where the demand is highest. And I can see that conversation happening here in Bend and other communities as they grow. It's happening up in the Dalles right now, of shifting to that stronger productivity model. But then recognizing the funds are coming from somewhere else. So there's an area that might see a decreased level of service when the funds are moved to a specific corridor or geographic area. That's what these planning processes and community input is about. So people are aware of and can give input on those service changes. And with that, I guess if anybody has a quick question, otherwise I'll pass it on to Andrea. All right. Hopefully you're still awake. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much, and that's good information.
No, thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, and I will provide the PowerPoint to the MPO staff so they can provide it to you if you want it for a reference later on. And I have notes in there as well that you can use.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, and Tyler, if you don't mind bringing it up on your screen. All right, so I think I know everybody on the call, but my name is Andrea Brome, the Transportation Director for Cascades East Transit. And we can start with the next slide. Okay, so we wanted to highlight some of the more fun projects that are undergoing here at CET. During COVID-19, we used the opportunity of the closure of the station to actually do an interior remodel. And coincidentally enough, we did go after a grant right prior to shutdown. So that is something that's being wrapped up right now. Things that we're doing inside the station. The first was to replace some of the doors, make sure that they were ADA accessible. One thing that our operations supervisors and myself were really excited about was removing the old carpeting. We wanted to put in some modern flooring that allows for better cleanup, spills, you name it. We're also constructing a larger customer counter, so it makes it more pleasing to come in and ask questions or buy tickets, etc. Just a side note, we're also a hub for intercity providers and ticketing. We provide ticketing for Greyhound, some of our services that go up to Portland or to the east towards Ontario. So we don't just provide service or customer service for CET, but brokerage with other transit providers to serve as a hub for information and fares. We're also updating the public restrooms. We painted the walls, new furniture. We're getting away from the lovely 8x11 pieces of paper and going electronic signage, which I'm super excited about. And next slide, I think, shows 2 pictures that I put in. So we're still in the midst of construction, but to the left is some of the old carpeting with, the metal gate that went over kind of our tiny customer service counter. And so we've replaced it with linoleum flooring. We are in the midst of constructing our customer counter, better lighting. Obviously, it's a bit brighter, some new paint, etc. So that's just highlighting some of the interior remodel. before I moved on. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right, next slide. Okay, so go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, this is what I'm interested in.
Me too. We don't look like a 1980s bus station anymore. Okay.
And the interior looks great. That's super exciting. But
It is.
oh boy, okay, here's this one.
This is the big one.
Yeah. Right.
So as well as a grant that will help us redesign the interior, we're in the design phase of the exterior parking lot. So as Teresa mentioned earlier, we still have a useful life to exist there at Hawthorne Station. And so in the interim, while we start to build up the concept of mobility hubs, look at other locations, it's important that we manage the safety flow of all modes of transportation in and around 3rd Street, Hawthorne, and 4th Street. We hired a architectural and engineering firm to start design work of redoing our parking lots that will allow our bus traffic to actually queue onto the property and not onto the neighboring streets. So what you're looking at right now is one of the first developed plans by AHPR, the A&E firm, okay? And for those who may not be terribly familiar with our site, to the left, you're actually seeing our building itself, and those kind of blue square boxes indicate the buses that will queue in our existing parking lots. And so the design work talks about redoing some of our pedestrian footprint, the grades, etc., the curbing, to bring on some of our Bend fixed route buses onto the property, and then either shift out towards Hawthorne or 4th Street to start their route. And then what you're seeing on the right is the two kind of very underutilized old parking lots behind our building, okay? We simply don't use that parking. We don't have enough employee staff to utilize that. And so we're actually going to take a section of that parking lot and build it to queue the remaining vehicles. And that could be dial-a-ride vehicles, intercity providers that meet at the Bend Hawthorne Station and then go to farther distances throughout the state. And so a lot of the design work is ensuring ADA compliance between those two lots so that the grade is not too steep. We're also talking about sight distance and curbing in and out of the lots so that it's easy for the drivers to maneuver, and then also the safety of the pedestrians. I will say in terms of priority, our priority first is to get the traffic off Hawthorne in between us and the Safeway development to the south of us. Because there's just so many conflicting modes. There's people walking, there's cyclists, there's passenger cars. And so that had the most conflict that we needed to move off of. Then 4th, and then some of the queuing buses in and around Irvine and 4th to bring them on. So that's kind of this is our kind of 30% design right now. We anticipate finalizing the design portion sometime in the next month or so. And then we are going to go out invitation to bid sometime in the fall, the winter, for construction to begin in the spring of 22. Any questions there? All right, next slide.
Andrea?
Yep.
I know that there was a neighborhood group that was very agitated last year. I mean,
Yes.
Are these redesigns, intended, specifically to address their concerns, or, and I'm just curious, kind of like their level of satisfaction, kind of after seeing some of these concepts. And
sure. So I could speak a little bit about to that. So what Commissioner Chang is referring to is what we are referring to as the Hawthorne Station Neighbor Group. They are a conglomerate of the Safeway property owners, surrounding neighbors, and a communications team that they've hired. They are part of this process. They actually have met with the designers and engineers, and they also sit on a subcommittee called the Facilities Committee. We're trying to be utterly transparent with this team. It does address the majority of their concerns, which was essentially safety, sight vision, and traffic control in and around the neighborhood. I will be very blunt. There are some neighbors that simply want us out of there. And obviously this design does not do that. But this is a great step towards improving our relationships with the neighborhood. So they have definitely been part of this process from the beginning.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Next slide. All right. So just a couple things that I haven't mentioned, along with the A&E's work, we do have to do a traffic facilities report. That is something within the City of Bend's development code. So that's underway, the TFR. That's a different consultant as well. We're actually meeting with the facilities committee this coming week to go over those designs. And as I mentioned, if all goes well, construction will begin in next year. Next slide. Okay. So I briefly touched upon what this facility committee is. As our normal TAC and a lot of our presentations throughout Central Oregon really focus on services, which tends to be the fun thing. You know, where are we going to serve next? Maybe a new route we're doing for rec services. We tend to ignore the not so flattering side of things, and that is facilities and capital planning. And finally, people are realizing that it's important that this be built up along with services. And that refers to, you know, our maintenance yard, our small leased offices throughout Central Oregon, our hub there in Bend, our Redmond location as well. And so this committee is to talk about some of those things that tend to get ignored because they're not so fun to talk about. And so obviously the big one we're talking about right now is the redesign of that parking lot, the concept of mobility hubs, which Teresa referred to in her earlier presentation. We're working with the City of Bend and the Bend MPO on the first mobility hub feasibility study. I know that's a mouthful, but this looks into kind of the management of the site, the success of the site. You know, it's not just transit, it's bike share, connecting in with sidewalks, maybe even food carts, public-private partnerships, et cetera. And so all of this is coming together, and obviously we wanted to create some type of subcommittee to bounce ideas off of. And then the fourth bullet point is something new that I just mentioned, Teresa. We may be looking at a grant application for some type of facilities plan. As she mentioned earlier, our 2040 plan is at the 30,000 foot level. It's a long range plan, but doesn't really get into the nuts and bolts of capital and facility needs. We're talking, you know, square footage, you know, the type of fleet that we'll be purchasing over the next 5 to 10 years, et cetera. I will also mention, I didn't put a bullet here, we're undergoing our first fleet electrification study. That is going to help us guide the way on hybrid or full electric buses in the future. We didn't want to go blind and simply apply for grants willy-nilly and not really understand the bigger picture of fleet electrification in either partnerships with Pacific Power, the state, or the city. So that plan, we've selected a consultant. That is the Center for Transportation and the Environment, CTE, not to get confused with us. So that study is going to actually get underway sometime in June. All right. Any questions on facilities? All right. I think I have one more slide. Okay. I just wanted to give an update to the group on some general service updates. This is all under STIF funding that Teresa mentioned, kind of the new tax dollars that came our way to expand services throughout the region. So for the City of Bend, we are going to be creating 2 new routes in the Northeast near Empire, Route 8, and in the Southeast along 15th and Knott to what's called Route 9. Those are areas we don't currently serve. My predecessor, Karen Friend, was kind enough to leave 2 numbers in our routes to know that they were coming. So Route 8 has never been selected and neither is 9. The vehicles have been ordered. The schedules and the planning have been discussed with the community. And we are hoping to have those vehicles on the ground sometime in August and September. Vehicle manufacturing has been delayed because a lot of COVID related things. So we're hoping these vehicles arrive soon. The second thing we're doing is increasing the frequency along 3rd Street and Greenwood Newport. And so this speaks specifically to the Bend TSP about creating high capacity corridors, making it attractive for people to take transit. This will get down to a 15-minute frequency for the north, south, east, west connections. Again, waiting for those vehicles to arrive. And then the third bullet point, something that was a little pet project of mine that I got really excited about, and we updated our right-of-way agreement with the city of Bend that allows us to work within the city's right-of-way to update our bus stops. And to be blunt, that means we can remove the plastic chairs and put in some nice infrastructure without having to go through the permit approval process. And that was signed as of last month. And that's it.
I see Mike Riley has his hand up.
Andrea, do you, first of all, nice to see all of you, even though it's not in person. But do you have a map, or maybe you just said it and I missed it, sort of a general description of where routes 8 and 9 will be?
Yeah, I know my team is working on that and they're finessing in it within GIS, but I could definitely give it to Tyler. I just got to get it out of shape files and onto some type of format you guys can view it from. So I could do that afterwards.
But broadly speaking, they're going to serve a certain particular parts of town. Like you have a general sense of that where they're going.
Yep. And so for Route 8 in the Northeast, we are going to be going up a portion of 3rd and 4th Street. So it's going to be able to transfer with one of our other routes. And then we're going to dip into, the Butler Market, Empire, Pine Nursery Park, and then loop back down again. Okay, back into somewhere around 8th Street. For Route 9, I will say we're going towards the Bend High School, down 9th, down to 15th and Knott, where the new high schools, and Anglingo Park is going to be built, and then up through the new Murphy Road extension, and then up 3rd, up back to Hawthorne again.
Great, thanks.
And Rick?
Sorry, it took me a second there to get everything turned on. Andrea, I'm putting the finishing touches on a statement of work for a facility plan on Highway 20, okay, mostly the Greenwood section. And I have references to enhanced transit on that route. But would it be okay if I reach out to you here in the next week or so to just get a specific focus? Because I want to make sure that the consulting firm is capturing specifically what would help CET.
Sure.
Okay.
And I will say something that, ODOT, as well as the city of Bend, I'm working with the city of Bend on their Greenwood portion that's updating that corridor to be more pedestrian friendly. We're going to be putting in some upgrades to our bus stops. And then Chris Chang at ODOT and Miranda Wells, we're working to update the ODOT portion as well. So
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Andrea. Any other business? We're on to agenda item number 10. Anyone? Comments, questions, anything you'd like to have staff bring forward in the next meeting? I don't see any hands.
I think, Barb, just can I interject?
Of course you can.
I think we internally at staff, we have compiled a list of topics. I mean, like the public transportation update. We will, I think what we should do is, my recommendation is send it out to you, the board members, and kind of get your feedback on, eventually we'd like to share all of these things with you, but, it's a list of like 10 or 15 different kind of information discussion items. What are your priorities, for the next few months? And then we can work with, the applicable staff at the city or ODOT or, whoever to get those presentations scheduled. That sound okay?
That sounds great.
Okay.
We will be looking forward to those. Excellent. So that leaves us time for public comment. if there was anybody that would like to make a public comment that didn't get a chance before. I don't see any hands there. Looks like we might be adjourning with a couple extra minutes to spare. All right. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move to adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.